The harsh Wyoming wind carried her sobbing across the dusty plains as Vaughn clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands, the paper crumpling beneath her white-knuckled grip. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, she had just lost everything: her parents to influenza, the family ranch to debt, and now her dignity to the cruel whispers of Copperhead Creek. Worthless, just like her pa, muttered Silas Cooper, the banker who'd foreclosed on her family's property, as he mounted his horse and rode away from the small farmhouse that had been her home for all her life. Hannah stood in the yard, her calico dress billowing around her thin frame. 3 days. That's all she had left before she would be forced to leave. With no skills beyond farming and no family to take her in, her options were slim in a town that had already decided her fate. The setting sun painted the western sky crimson as Hannah sank to her knees in the dirt. Her long auburn hair, once neatly pinned, had come loose and whipped around her tear-streaked face. She had spent the last of her money burying her parents, believing she could somehow manage the farm alone, but the drought had killed what little crop they had planted, and the bank had shown no mercy. "Ain't proper for a woman to be alone out here anyway," the townsfolk said. "She'll end up in the brothel or dead. It's just a matter of time." A mile away, Flynn Sullivan slowed his mare to a walk as he crested the hill overlooking the Vaughn property. At 30, Flynn had spent most of his life on horseback, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana before settling in Wyoming 2 years ago. The small ranch he'd purchased had prospered under his care, thanks to the stream that ran through his property and his knack for animal husbandry. He'd heard about the Vaughn's misfortune in town. The gossip had reached his ears as he purchased supplies at the general store, where Mrs. Patterson had clucked her tongue and shaken her head. "That Hannah girl has nothing left. No skills, no husband, and certainly no prospects. Worthless investment, that family. Always dreaming bigger than their means." Flynn had frowned at the woman's words. He'd never spoken to Hannah Vaughn, but he remembered seeing her in town occasionally, always with a kind smile for the children who crossed her path and a gentle hand for any stray animal she encountered. Now, as he watched her small figure collapsed in the yard, something twisted in his chest. He urged his horse forward, the decision forming in his mind before he could fully consider the implications. Hannah didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over her sobs until a shadow fell across her. She looked up, hastily wiping her tears with her sleeve, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. "Miss Vaughn?" The man's voice was deep but gentle. She didn't recognize him immediately, a tall figure atop a chestnut mare, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. "Yes." She struggled to her feet, attempting to regain some dignity. "Flynn Sullivan." He touched the brim of his hat. "I own the property to the east." Hannah nodded, vaguely recalling the name. "Mr. Sullivan. I apologize for this." She gestured vaguely to herself, aware of her disheveled appearance. Flynn dismounted, leading his horse closer. "No need for apologies. I heard about your parents. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." The simple kindness in his voice nearly undid her composure again. "I also heard about the bank." His blue eyes held no pity, just a straightforward concern that Hannah found she could bear. 3 days isn't much time." "No, it isn't." She straightened her shoulders. "But I'll manage." "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question hung in the air between them. Hannah looked away, unwilling to admit that she had nowhere. The stagecoach to Cheyenne cost more than she had, and she knew no one who would take her in. Flynn seemed to read her silence correctly. He cleared his throat. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Vaughn." Hannah's eyes snapped back to his, wary. She'd already received several propositions from men in town since her father's death, none of them honorable. As if sensing her thoughts, Flynn raised his hands. "Nothing improper. I need help with my place. The house needs tending, and I'm often away with the cattle. I could use someone to keep things in order, look after the chickens and garden." You're offering me employment?" Hannah asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Flynn nodded. "Room, board, and wages. Fair ones. Why would you do this? You don't know me." Flynn shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with the question. "I know what it's like to lose everything. Someone gave me a chance once. Seems only right to do the same." Hannah studied him, searching for deception in his features, but finding only earnestness. Still, pride made her hesitate. "I don't want charity, Mr. Sullivan." "It's not charity if you're working for it," he replied. "And I genuinely need the help. Been eating my own cooking for 2 years now, and I'm not sure I'll survive another winter of it." His mouth quirked into a small smile. Despite herself, Hannah felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "I'm told I'm a decent cook." "Then you're already more qualified than me." Flynn's expression grew serious again. "Think about it. You don't have to decide right now." But Hannah knew she had no real choice. It was this or destitution. "I accept your offer, Mr. Sullivan." "Thank you." Flynn nodded, seeming pleased but not surprised by her quick decision. "Pack your things. I'll come for you tomorrow morning." He mounted his horse again, tipping his hat before turning to ride away. Hannah watched him go, a strange mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. She had no idea what awaited her at Flynn Sullivan's ranch, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, Flynn arrived as promised, driving a wagon for Hannah's belongings. There wasn't much: some clothes, a few books, her mother's china, and her father's old rifle. The rest would be auctioned off with the property. As they drove away, Hannah couldn't bring herself to look back at the only home she'd ever known. Instead, she focused on the road ahead, the golden prairie stretching to the distant mountains. "It's not much," Flynn said as they approached his ranch an hour later. "But it's mine." The main house was modest but solid, with a small stable, chicken coop, and barn nearby. A corral held several horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. What caught Hannah's attention, however, was the sprawling garden beside the house, bursting with vegetables and flowers. "You grew all this?" she asked, impressed. Flynn chuckled. "My mother insisted I learn. Said a man should know how to feed himself from the land." He helped her down from the wagon and showed her to a small room off the kitchen. "It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the garden. It was more than Hannah had expected, and certainly better than the alternatives that had awaited her. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. This is more than generous." "Flynn," he corrected. "If we're going to be living under the same roof, we might as well use first names." Hannah nodded, though the informality made her slightly uncomfortable. "Flynn, then." The first few days established their routine. Hannah rose early to prepare breakfast before Flynn headed out to work with the cattle. She spent her days cleaning, tending the garden, and caring for the chickens. In the evenings, she had dinner waiting when Flynn returned, dusty and tired from his day's work. They ate mostly in silence at first, both unsure of how to navigate their new arrangement. Hannah learned that Flynn was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He always thanked her for meals, made sure she had everything she needed, and never entered her room without knocking. A week into her stay, Hannah was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the corral. She rushed over to find Flynn wrestling with a young colt that had somehow gotten tangled in a rope. "Can I help?" she called. Flynn glanced up, his face strained with effort. "Grab that knife from my belt and cut the rope." Carefully, Hannah approached slowly, reaching for the knife at his waist. The colt thrashed as she drew near, nearly knocking her over, but Flynn steadied her with a firm hand. "Easy now," he murmured, and Hannah wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or the horse. With trembling fingers, she cut through the rope, freeing the colt, which immediately bolted to the other side of the corral. "You did well," Flynn said, taking the knife back. Most people would have panicked. I grew up around horses, Hannah replied, though we never had one quite so spirited. Flynn's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. That's thunder. More trouble than he's worth, according to everyone in town who's tried to break him. But I see something in him. Hannah watched as Flynn approached the colt again, speaking in low, soothing tones until the animal allowed him to stroke its neck. There was a gentle patience in his handling that contradicted his rugged exterior. You're good with him, she observed. Flynn shrugged. Animals respond to how you treat them. Same as people, I reckon. The words lingered in Hannah's mind as she returned to her laundry. Flynn Sullivan was nothing like the men she'd known in town, not loud or boastful or quick to judge. There was a steadiness to him that she found increasingly comforting. As summer progressed, Hannah settled into life at the Sullivan Ranch. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since her parents' deaths, she slept soundly at night, too exhausted for grief to keep her awake. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Flynn broke their comfortable silence. Town's having a harvest dance next Saturday. Thought you might like to go. Hannah looked up from her mending, surprised. Oh, I don't think that would be wise. Why not? Flynn's expression was genuinely puzzled. Hannah set down her sewing.
People talk, Flynn.
They've likely already been gossiping about our arrangement. If we attend the dance together. Let them talk, Flynn said firmly. You deserve some enjoyment after all you've been through. And I could use a night away from this place myself. Hannah hesitated. The thought of facing the townsfolk who had dismissed her as worthless made her stomach clench with anxiety. Yet there was also a part of her that longed for music, for dancing, for some semblance of normal life. All right, she finally agreed. But don't say I didn't warn you about the gossip. Flynn's smile was worth the risk. I've never much cared what people think. The night of the dance arrived, and Hannah found herself fretting over her appearance for the first time in months. She had only one dress suitable for the occasion, a blue cotton with white trim that had belonged to her mother. It was slightly too large, but she'd taken it in as best she could. When she emerged from her room, Flynn was waiting by the wagon, dressed in clean clothes with his hair slicked back. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking. You look beautiful, Hannah. The simple compliment brought color to her cheeks. Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself. The drive to town was filled with a new tension, an awareness that had been growing between them over the weeks. Hannah found herself stealing glances at Flynn's profile, noticing the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes caught the fading sunlight. The town hall was decorated with lanterns and harvest bounty, already crowded with familiar faces when they arrived. Conversations faltered as Hannah entered on Flynn's arm, and she felt the weight of stares. Ignore them, Flynn murmured, guiding her toward the refreshment table. But it was impossible to ignore the whispers that followed them. Can you believe she wormed her way into Sullivan's home? Poor man probably doesn't realize what he's gotten himself into. Always knew she'd find a way to avoid honest work. Some women know how to use what they have. Hannah's grip tightened on Flynn's arm, shame burning through her despite knowing the accusations were unfounded. Flynn must have heard too, for his expression darkened. Before Hannah could stop him, he turned to face the group of women who had been whispering. Ladies, he said, his voice carrying enough to silence the nearby conversations. I wonder if you'd be so kind as to direct your observations to me directly, rather than behind my back? The women flushed, uncomfortable under his direct gaze. Miss Vaughn is employed at my ranch as a housekeeper and has performed her duties admirably. She's shown more courage and dignity in the face of adversity than I've witnessed from those who've done nothing but judge her. I consider myself fortunate to have her assistance. A hush fell over the gathering. Hannah stood frozen, torn between mortification at being the center of attention and gratitude for Flynn's defense. Now, Flynn continued, his tone lightening, I believe I promised Miss Vaughn a dance. He led her to the dance floor as the musicians struck up a lively tune. Hannah followed in a daze, hardly believing what had just transpired. You didn't have to do that, she whispered as they began to move with the music. Yes, I did. Flynn's hand was warm at her waist. I won't have anyone speaking ill of you, especially not when you've worked harder than anyone I know just to survive. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Hannah's chest. As they danced, the whispers faded into the background, replaced by the rhythm of the music and the steady presence of Flynn's arms around her. By the end of the evening, something had shifted between them. On the ride home, Flynn seemed deep in thought, and Hannah found herself wondering what was on his mind. As they approached the ranch, Flynn suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop. I want to show you something, he said, helping her down. He led her past the house toward a stand of trees she hadn't explored before. As they walked, the moon emerged from behind a cloud, illuminating a small clearing where a structure stood partially built the frame of what appeared to be a cabin. What is this? Hannah asked, confusion evident in her voice. Flynn ran a hand through his hair, suddenly seeming nervous. I've been working on it in my spare time. It's for you. Hannah stared at him, uncomprehending. For me? But why? Because you deserve a place of your own. Somewhere that belongs to you, that no one can take away. Flynn took a deep breath. I heard what they said in town about you being worthless, and it's been eating at me. I wanted to show you that you have value not just as a worker, but as a person. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes as she looked at the frame of the cabin, imagining what it could become. Flynn, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just know that you have choices. You can stay on as my housekeeper if you wish, or you can have this cabin as your own place. I'll help you finish it either way. The gesture was so unexpected, so generous that Hannah could barely process it. Why would you do this for me? Flynn's gaze met hers, steady and clear in the moonlight. Because in the time you've been here, I've come to care for you, Hannah. More than I expected to. More than might be proper, given our arrangement. Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. The admission she'd scarcely allowed herself to hope for hung in the air between them. I care for you too, she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and right. Flynn took a step closer, his hand reaching up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I don't want you to feel obligated. If you don't feel the same, Hannah silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. I do feel the same. It's been growing every day, but I was afraid to acknowledge it. The relief in Flynn's eyes was palpable. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Hannah responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. I want to court you properly, Hannah Vaughn. If you'll allow it. Hannah smiled, a genuine, uninhibited smile that felt foreign after so many months of grief and worry. I would like that very much. The following weeks took on a new dimension as Flynn continued work on the cabin while also openly courting Hannah. They rode together on Sundays, picnicked by the stream, and in the evenings, Flynn would read aloud from one of Hannah's books while she sewed or mended. The cabin progressed steadily, with Flynn adding a stone fireplace, solid wooden floors, and windows that caught the morning light. He took Hannah's suggestions seriously, designing the space to suit her preferences. It's becoming more beautiful than I imagined, Hannah said one evening as they stood admiring the nearly completed structure. It's still missing something, Flynn replied thoughtfully. Hannah looked around, trying to see what he meant. What? Hope, Flynn said simply. A cabin needs more than walls and a roof. It needs a future. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Hannah's breath caught as he knelt before her. Hannah Vaughn, when I first saw you kneeling in that yard, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. You've brought warmth to my home and joy to days that were merely about survival before. I'm asking if you'll share that cabin with me, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She would have loved you." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Flynn slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into his arms. "They were wrong about you," he murmured against her hair. "You were never worthless. You were always the most valuable treasure, waiting to be discovered." The wedding took place in October, a small affair with only a few of Flynn's friends in attendance. The townsfolk who had gossiped were noticeably absent from the invitation list, though news of the union spread quickly through Copperhead Creek. Hannah wore a new dress, purchased with her own wages, and carried wildflowers Flynn had picked that morning. They exchanged vows in front of the newly completed cabin, which Flynn had furnished with a handmade bed, table, and chairs. That evening, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "That's 6 months ago. I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy again." She turned in his embrace to face him. "You didn't just build me a cabin, Flynn. You built me a new life." Flynn's eyes softened as he cupped her face in his calloused hands. "We built it together, and we'll keep building it, day by day." As winter descended on Wyoming, the Sullivan cabin became known as the warmest place on the plains, not because of its sturdy walls or efficient fireplace, but because of the love that filled it. Flynn and Hannah worked side by side, expanding the ranch, adding to their cattle herd, and planning for the future. In town, attitudes gradually shifted. Hannah's quiet dignity and Flynn's unwavering support eventually silenced the worst of the gossips. When Hannah opened a small school for the ranchers' children too far from town to attend regularly, even her harshest critics had to acknowledge her contribution to the community. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pasture, chicks in the coop, and the news that Hannah was expecting their first child. Flynn's joy knew no bounds as he immediately began crafting a cradle, carving it with the same care he had shown in building their home. "What shall we name him?" Flynn asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on Hannah's growing belly. "Him?" "You're so certain it's a boy," Hannah teased. Flynn grinned. "Just a feeling. But girl or boy, this child will know they're valued from their very first breath." Hannah covered his hand with hers. "I was thinking, if it's a boy, perhaps Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Sullivan." Flynn tested the name. "It has a strong sound to it. And if it's a girl?" "Hope," Hannah said without hesitation. "Because that's what you gave me when I had none left." Flynn's eyes glistened in the firelight. Hope Sullivan. Perfect for a girl born in a cabin built with love. In July of 1879, exactly 1 year after Flynn had first offered Hannah employment, Hope Elizabeth Sullivan entered the world in the cabin her father had built. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and from her first cry, she was the center of their universe. As Hannah nursed their daughter by the window that overlooked the thriving garden, Flynn sat beside them, his face filled with wonder. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you," he said softly. "But somehow, my heart just expanded to include her too." Hannah smiled, understanding completely. "That's the miracle of family. It grows with each new addition." "Speaking of additions," Flynn said, a gleam in his eye, "I've been thinking about expanding the cabin. Perhaps adding another room or two." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Planning ahead, Mr. Sullivan?" "Always, Mrs. Sullivan." He leaned in to kiss her gently. "I want to fill this home with all the hope and love it can hold." As the years passed, the Sullivan ranch prospered, and the family grew. Thomas joined his sister 2 years later, followed by twins, Sarah and Samuel, in 1883. The cabin expanded accordingly, with Flynn adding rooms as needed, always maintaining the warmth and character of the original structure. Hannah never forgot those dark days when she had knelt in the dirt, believing herself worthless and abandoned. The memory served not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of how far she had come, of the strength she had discovered within herself, and of the love that had transformed her life. On their 10th anniversary, Flynn presented Hannah with a wooden plaque he had carved himself. It hung above their door, a constant reminder to all who entered. Within these walls, we found hope. Within this home, we found love. Within each other, we found worth beyond measure. And as they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard that stretched toward the distant mountains, Hannah knew that the cruel whispers of the past had been silenced by the symphony of their shared life, a life built on the foundation of a simple cabin and the boundless hope it contained.